Okay. Yeah. You all right?
Yeah.
Good? Yeah, okay. I'm Jon Favreau, and this is Conversations on Creativity. And I have a wonderful array of guests here. We got Issa Rae. We have Damien Chazelle. Am I saying that right?
Yeah.
We have Lin-Manuel Miranda and Donald Glover, a.k.a. Childish Gambino. Is that?
Yeah.
Is that for here, or is this a different, for this venue?
No, we can
Or-
talk about it.
We
For
can
sure.
talk about it?
Yeah, like it's not a secret.
No, I know it's not a secret. And you got the name from the Wu-Tang website?
Name generator. Yeah.
Name generator.
Really?
Stop.
Yeah.
I didn't know that was the
You didn't
origin
know that?
story.
Yeah.
No.
I feel like I told that story a million times.
Oh, that's great.
No, yeah.
Yeah.
I got it from that.
Is it still available? Is the service still available?
Yeah, you can still do it. Lots of people
Yes.
tend to do it. I didn't. If I had known it was gonna be something for real, I wouldn't have used it. Like a thing.
Yes.
But yeah.
But he came out with a good one.
No, yeah. Mine was the coolest one at the party.
Yes. Mine was Hungry Clemenza. I didn't know it.
Really?
Yeah, no, I don't know.
That sounds like a real one, though.
Clemenza already hungry.
Exactly. It's like, I don't need that. By the way, let me just, full disclosure, I see your face every day when I wake my 15-year-old son up because there's on his door is a portrait of you that, is this something that was so?
It's probably the Because the Internet cover, which is my face.
Just you looking very handsome, staring at me as I'm waking my son up every day. So he knows you through your music. I came up in the improv community, so I kind of know you more through
in the improv.
that, and we're both kind of a little bit nerdy and into comics.
I don't
and
think
stuff.
of you as nerdy at all.
We're not, everything that, I think that's a common theme here, is that we're all a little bit nerdy or geeky in a way, but certainly through improv, which is definitely a subset of a nerdier subset of the theater comedy community.
I mean, like nerdy is just stuff liking stuff that takes work to like.
Yes.
I think because you freestyle, which I feel like I mean, you do too. Like, I mean, no, you don't count
level,
it.
Not at all.
You do a lot on your show.
I know, but it's like first draft free. It's like whack. It's supposed to be. It's supposed to be.
But that's kind of what's nerdy
supposed
about
to
it
be.
is I think there's a vulnerability that you have to get comfortable with.
Yeah.
To be, I guess nerdy's kind of overused, but a sense of your identity is something you're going to put out there, and you're fair game. Like you could show your insecurities and do things and fail and not afraid. Not only taking high percentage shots, but putting it out there a little bit hard. And I think that's kind of a common thread of, from what I know about all your stories and the work that I've seen, it seems like that's a big part of it. And I think that's part of the bravery that comes with certainly doing improv. If you're trying to look cool when you're doing that type of comedy,
You're dead.
You're dead.
Yeah, to me, there's like nothing I'm more in awe of than improv. I mean, just improv, period. Like that kind of like, when I think of, like I've found ways to remove myself from being too exposed as like a art. Like I used to play drums, but then like I used to do a lot of music, but the performing stuff just gave me too much stage fright. So I was like, even when I was hidden behind a kit, I couldn't deal with that. So then I like hide behind the camera or hide behind a computer typewriter, whatever. So I think that's why like performers in general, I find kind of especially impressive to me. And then, the next level, I think, is performers who literally are performing without a net, like improv performers.
And jazz,
just, like,
which is a through line in both your films, yeah?
Yeah, true. I mean, maybe it's why I'm like obsessed with those people as well, yeah.
It's pretty strange that we keep running into each other.
Maybe it means something.
I doubt it.
Yeah, I don't think so. You could just write your own roles, write something that's as interesting as you are.
What are you gonna do?
I have my own club.
Is that gonna happen every time? I think so.
It's a muscle that's like not as, I don't know if necessary is the right word, but it's a muscle that people don't have to use as much. Like editing is like a skill people use a lot, like even in everyday lives.
You mean
like,
self-editing your own conversations, or?
I mean, yeah, I mean but like on Vine or like editing, like just
you're
being
curating
able,
your best version of
yourself. Like even like the way we live now is mostly like editing and knowing your brand. So it's like very weird when people, it's cool when people are able to do, because I know like a lot of jazz musicians, and it's like it's cool when you can hear a mess up and then hear it turn into something.
And then they play
cool.
with it.
Yeah. Like it's fun to see.
It's also really generous too. I mean, you're kind of making way for someone else to be great. Like the art of improv is to help someone else and to deliver for them. It's like an alley-oop in a sense,
Sure,
and I really love that element because you kind of have to help the other person be better
Well, on your show, it feels very naturalistic and conversational. Do you encourage improvisation, or is it all written ahead of time to sound like it?
We definitely encourage improvisation, but it's written for the most part, and
Sure.
it's written from like real conversations that I've had. A lot of it is taken from, just how I talk, how a lot of my friends talk.
Well, hello, Daniel. No, you drive on the wrong side of the street. Let me sprinkle some pussy parmesan on you. Awesome. You hungry? Hey, Tiger. So stupid. Take a drink. Woo! Shot. You gonna take this 90 or not? Take this 90. Take it. It's too aggressive.
So I wanted that to feel like you're just
Authentic.
Yeah.
And it does.
Thank you.
Atlanta, sort of, also, you're from there, and you also wanted to give a naturalism, well, a heightened naturalism of the experience. No?
There's we do improv a lot. We try to do this weird thing where it's like we try and give two pieces of information at the same time, because I feel like that's real life too. Like somebody's talking and then another conversation's happening, and then you kind of have to choose. Like I've heard a lot of people use like the term mumblecore, which I take offense to. Not because it's like
after my time.
Not even like mumblecore being bad, but it's just like because it's not. It's just like I hate like labels like that where it's just like easy to put that in there. But like we have a lot of stuff is improv. I try and get them to do that. What are you guys doing right now?
You and Darius do that deal?
Do not know what you mean.
The ones with the Mexicans, you guys had the guns, you guys were like, we ain't scared of these guys.
Yo, okay, man. All right, niggas, send any money. All right, peace out. Man,
he's a good guy.
He's
legit.
With all that, yeah.
He's cool. Why didn't you tell him?
Man, stop talking, man.
What brought me into writing was improvisation, and when you write well, you're kind of improvising alone.
No,
like, that's kind of like when it's going well, you're just playing two different characters talking to each other. And I think probably, and there's also a very musical aspect to both your films. There's a lot of rhythm and breaking rhythm and getting the laugh on breaking the rhythm. Same thing with Atlanta, and clearly a lot of music in a musical. And I wonder how that informs all of it. And even like the freestyle rapping, there's a sense of a rhythm meter always to comedy and to music, but it seems to be something that you are all kind of aware of as you present your stories.
There's like a suspension of disbelief thing that I think happens. I actually want to ask you guys, like with like making musicals, like do you guys find it hard now because people's suspension of disbelief is like different than it used to be?
Yeah, well, I'd be curious to hear your feeling on La La Land, because it seems to me that you're making a return to the old style where it's like here's what they're doing, and we're not cutting around someone's dance technique. Like this is them, and they are and you get to see it the way Stanley Donen would just okay, there's Sid Charisse and there's Fred Astaire, like look at them go, and really just capturing it as opposed to trying to edit around or make it look cool. Like it's a return
flash it
to
up
that,
in a way that
which is really exciting. Talk about that.
Because I would ask you also if on the stage it feels different. For me, like on the screen, certainly there is this like big gap right now in terms of like that you have to kind of cross to do a musical, at least like an earnest musical where you're not kind of immediately putting quotation marks on it. It's part of the reason why we like decided to, like a lot of stage shows, begin this movie with a big ensemble number right off the bat. Mainly as kind of like a warning sign to people in the audience. The people are not going to be comfortable with it. They'll leave right away, and then the rest of us can have a good time, hopefully. But yeah, it's like I was definitely very conscious of like how do you like I've been in theaters with certain recent musicals, even sometimes when they're based on kind of IP that people know, where the first moment where someone starts to actually like break the diegesis and breaking a song, you could kind of feel people clenching up in the theater and looking at the screen, and it's just, I imagine that happened less in the 40s and 50s, and it just kind of, so I was really conscious of that. I mean, obviously, like, I guess on stage you at least have still an active tradition there, but do you feel like,
absolutely, and it was interesting.
Do you feel like you have to convert the skeptics every,
not so much convert the skeptics, but it is certainly true that when you've got a camera and, the subject is this close, there's a bigger threshold you have to cross to break into song.
I think because people assume the camera is
it's
telling
real.
you the truth.
Yeah.
Whereas you have to.
Well, I think it's like
there's such a suspension of disbelief already in a theater just by being there. You
it's
know?
a technology thing.
And
because like cameras have gotten so better. Like things look real. I feel like that's what's like.
Yeah, the
happening.
more
It's
real we
like,
get, the more
real we get, the more people are like, well, I want it to reflect my world a little bit.
Yeah.
And it's hard to get people. It's usually like kind of like things get more binary anyway. Like I think everything now because of the internet is like a lot of like or dislike this and like there's no in between. But it's like with that, it's like, yeah, you're either improvising entirely and people are like, oh, yay, like I know that's part of this is that he might mess up. Or it's like I'm supposed to believe every bit of this a little bit.
Yeah.
And it's like hard, I think, just because it's changing faster.
I had an interesting thing with Hamilton, which is, we start with heightened language. It starts with sort of this heightened hip hop speech. And there was a version of Act 1 of Hamilton where I worked with a playwright and we'd have songs and then we would break into scenes and they'd be like, hey, I'll see you at the dinner, dialogue.
Yeah.
And we realized it didn't work with Hamilton because when you have an opening number that is this intense heightened speech, to go back down to like, oh, I'm gonna have some water. Like you can't drop the ball.
What was so cool about that is, and when I saw it with my daughter, I was like, this is like when I studied Shakespeare. This was we look at Shakespeare now like it's classic and that's kind of old-fashioned-y, but at the time that felt the iambic pentameter, blank verse, all that was very current, and I would say the equivalent of the poetry of your show. And they were telling stories about characters that were hundreds of years old then.
Right.
So it was a way to bring the audience in because that was meant for everybody. Whether you knew the stories or not, you were going to get entertained. And so I thought it was a really good idiom for our time, whether it was conscious or otherwise, to make it draws you in, and it's a type of thing where there's always a beat going, and there's just an engine driving through this whole piece. And then you're learning something, and you're also feeling a tremendous amount. And the energy in that room, too, is just amazing, just amazing. And I went in there really being a little skeptical, as you always are when somebody says how awesome something is. It's almost a curse to have.
Well, that's also the thing too. Is like everybody, everything is lit. It's like this is the best thing.
It's a rush to say that too.
Yeah,
it's a rush
everybody
to be
wants
able
to
to
say
say
that.
this is the best thing I've ever seen, and if you don't agree, you're an idiot. And everybody get on board. And there's such a pressure to live up to that. But at the same time, I don't ever want that for my own work. No matter what it is, I don't want, everyone to be on board or everyone to exclaim that it's the best thing they've ever seen. Like that, no, I don't feel like that's the goal. I feel like the goal is to make people feel and to make people talk about it at the very least or have a discussion. But there's such a hype culture right now that's just.
Well, it goes back to that like-dislike thing. Like you can only be like, this is the worst, or this is like, because there's no room for discussion.
Well, you emerged
Like,
from that culture though, from posting your own stuff, right? And then people reacting to it, and then eventually now mainstream with HBO with your show, and isn't that how you were discovered?
Yeah, definitely. But that hype element was kind of taken away because it was so small scale and it had time to just grow and build an audience. And I guess I didn't have direct access to that, to a certain extent.
Because you have to earn your way up.
I feel like I did earn my way up.
It's
and
like a
this is
band
just new
touring
medium.
and getting fans.
Yes, and then
And how long had you been doing it before?
4 or 5 years.
Wow.
Yeah, like by the time I did the web series that really catapulted my career. That was like my 3rd attempt.
I came up in a totally different time. What's that like? What is it? How do you set out to do it? How does it build? How do you know you're doing well? Just help me understand what.
How do you know you're doing well? You know you're doing well. I guess when people are talking about it, when people are sharing it. But for me, it was just a measure of this is something that's gaining traction. Like I was mostly behind the scenes in the other 2 series that I was doing, and decided to tell this particular story that I related to, and then I found other people feeling for it and relating to it as well. Right. And I liked that. I like making people relate to, one, just like people of color and Black people specifically. I just think that, especially in these times, that's a cool trait to be able to be like, I'm from this specific background, and I identify with what you're going through, and I think that's such a powerful tool to bring people into your world and to bring a sense of understanding. So with this show, I wanted to just make Black people relatable?
My sister told me about Issa's show, like a while ago. Like she was the one. She was like, "You gotta check this out." I think it was because like that. She had never seen anything like that ever. Like really, she was like, "That show's not like." She watched it like it was like on television. Like at the time, like
that's
that
how,
was.
That's how a lot of people watched it.
Yeah.
That's how I heard about it too. It was like, oh, well, it's finishing. Like you got to go catch up.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Like you're owning it. It's like it's really cool, but it's like it's a very specific. I think all of that like online stuff. I think is.
Well, you came from it too, right?
Well, yeah, but it was different at the time, like, cause like I never, we still, it's weird being like, I guess like kind of millennials, like you're like, there's so many blueprints and you're like aiming for that, and by the time you get there, you're like, this doesn't exist anymore, like at all.
Well, what was your,
my
what was your
Friendster
line?
series got canceled.
Yeah,
like really.
yeah.
As soon as I knew who I was friends with, I was.
I don't know about the online component to your career. So is this previous to writing for 30 Rock?
Yeah,
And
I was in this like a sketch group called Derek Comedy, and I remember the day like we used to put them just online, and we just like, and you would have to like, you know.
would you be on stage, or
we
would
would
you do
do
coverage in the home?
We do stage stuff. We had like a show at UCB, and then like we'd shoot like on the street, like actual like that. But at the time, it was so new. Like our friend, like Dominic came, I remember, to a meeting we had, and he was like, "Yeah, we should put them up on YouTube because we were paying too much money to put them up and like download them. Let's put them up on this thing that just came out called YouTube."
Yeah. Have
And
you heard of Lazy Sunday?
it was like it was before that.
Pre-Lazy
Like before that, so much so when we put up our first video, people in the comments said this isn't real. Like people hadn't had sketches.
This isn't a documentary.
Like, they were like, this isn't a dog
Where's the
playing with a
cat?
ball. Like this is somebody wrote this. Like they didn't get it.
Fake.
Like
yet.
it was the moon landing that you were trying to pawn one over on.
Like we were
Right.
trying to get them to understand, but like that's how new it was.
Right.
And then we kind of were like, oh yeah, maybe this will get us on television, not knowing like that is television now.
Nowadays, I guess anything that you put up anywhere has a chance to catch on. It's pretty much understood. You just put it out there, and then I guess if you build a following, that's when you get the feedback to know you're doing well, and then you just keep doing more of it.
There's also such value of exactly what he described. You know, the sense of discovery of, have you seen this?
Yeah.
It's, that's so important. So much is sold to us all the time.
Right.
It's like that thing of like, have you haven't. But when you find something or your friend tells you about something, that's so valuable, and that sense of discovery is increasingly rare.
Well, it seems that like that all of that relates to this value that we're placing now on authenticity, whether it's in the material you're putting up there, if it's authentic to your experience, or the way it's being recommended and not marketed to you. You have when people and the like thing, it is binary, but there is a sense of crowdsourcing whether something is of value, and the word gets out. And do you all see that as a positive?
How you get to the product is almost more important than the product nowadays. 30% of people are like, this is amazing. There's going to be 20% are like, well, I have to agree with my friends a little bit, or like there's less of like. We release a lot of our stuff on Sundays because I know bloggers are asleep and people don't want to talk. Like people have to think about it for themselves, which doesn't happen a lot. Like people know like if a cool person, like if Jaden Smith is like, this is cool, a bunch of 13-year-olds are gonna be like, this is cool. Like I don't really have to think about it. Not to say that's a good or bad thing, but it's just like influence happens faster because of the internet. So I feel like how people get to it, like if people feel like my friend told me this and it's underground, people feel more invested in it. Like I felt like with Derek Comedy, like we would see like it was there was a community that happened on YouTube, but it was a lot of like college kids who would like follow us around, and it became like, like fish or something.
From like at least from my vantage point and making movies, it's like, to me, I like hear stuff like this and it makes me very nostalgic or romantic, romanticize an era of movies that was actually before my time, when your kind of local two-screen theater would run a movie for months and just kind of, and it would start off, something like, say Eraserhead or something opens up and no one knows about it. And then it just kind of plays and plays and it gains this following. Now theaters don't allow that, and now what's replaced that is, at least in terms of, whether it's movies or TV, whatever you call it, in terms of like filmed content, what's replaced that is the internet. And I guess TV to some extent, because you can have a certain amount of life there, but that idea of like allowing a piece of art to just kind of slowly find its way into the culture is really something that Hollywood, at least, is like incapable of doing in any kind of, unless it has a ton of money, and then it's all about kind of trying to seed your way to that opening weekend, and that's all you've got, and then the movies that are out are out.
It amazes me though that storytelling has not changed that much. It has in form, but what I would have done with independent films, because you had video that would back up the independent, and every once in a while, an independent film would make 10 times as much as it costs. People were placing bets on those movies.
Yeah.
And so when I started off, it was more like, I think more like the La La Land model, or certainly like the Whiplash model. But when I see your shows, that feels very much like speaking to that type of audience and putting it out there and getting a chance for that to grow. It shifted from the big screen to the small screen. But in a way, it feels like the storytelling offers a lot more opportunity, because you're not just doing one and if you get discovered, you take the next step. You're getting to explore those characters longer, slowly build the audience. There's not that pressure on opening like you're talking about.
Yeah.
That's out of the theaters.
And I think that's where the internet's sort of a bonus. You think of Breaking Bad, where that was not a show that opened strong, but then it was on Netflix. And when Netflix was a new thing, the streaming of Netflix was a new thing, and people caught up with it. And then by the time the third season rolls out, it's like, all right, what's going to happen? And whereas previously we all would have taped it on VHS if you're lucky, but the ability to amass and stay with a story and go back and go, oh, I want to rewind that, I want to go see it, as opposed to like it was on TV and now it's gone.
Yeah, I find myself wanting to be immersed in a world now. Like even where films are concerned, like I used to be a huge movie buff at the end of the day. I used to go to the movies, every other week. And now I found myself wanting to be in 12 hours of a television show. And if I see like a movie on Netflix, for example, if I see a new one, I'm like, an hour and a half. Nobody has time for an hour and a half to watch a movie.
I only have 12 hours.
I only have 12 hours, right, for this, because I want to be immersed. I want to be in a world, and I want to feel like my time means something at the end of the day. And I feel like there's a communal experience to just being able to live with certain characters and storylines and feel like I'm a part of this world. It's odd to me now. And it makes me sad, because movies are being pushed out, so fast, and it is just about like after opening weekend is the next one.
I gotta say though, people said it about theater, but then a show like Hamilton comes out and all of a sudden, boom, or La La Land, honestly, it's like, could not be more classic in its construction and its attention to form. And what you start to realize is, I think there's just a lot of competition, and the stuff that I would have watched, you switch off of, because there's so much great stuff out there, because it's democratized content creation.
I like to think that with the underline on democratizing, like that there's something good to be said. I feel like, at least from the vantage point of movies in Hollywood, we do a lot of doom and gloom about, the movies are dying and TV's to blame, or the internet's to blame, or whatever. There's a lot of like, woe is me kind of think pieces and stuff like that, as opposed to just actually welcoming that there's good content that's raising the bar, and that, okay, maybe that just means we have to do this much more, we have to try this harder to give people a reason to get out of their houses. I mean, that's not, that led to some interesting things in the 50s when TV first came around. Sure. It's always kind of, those kind of shifts have always, I think, ultimately pushed things forward, and at least most of the time. So I'd like to think of it as like a welcome challenge, as opposed to, a death knell,
And they're just different in the type of stories you could tell. It's sad that you can't tell certain types of stories on the big screen. There's this whole level of budget that's gone, and a lot of
the mid-size,
the mid-size ones, the ones that would win the Oscars, the ones that would, but then like you're saying, it gravitates to, the small screen, where you have time to actually, because you can only write so many versions of a rock and roll song, because it's got to be that same length and that same structure. But if you have all that time to tell a story and get to know those characters, all of a sudden it becomes Nicholas Nickleby. You could do, you could really go deep. And here's another interesting thing, because I think I relate to what you're saying, in that if I'm watching a movie, even at home, same screen, or a part of a series, like a limited series, something like your shows, if I'm watching a movie and I pause it, I'm like, oh man, there's still an hour left. Like, I feel like this is long. When I pause a television show, I'm sad when it's almost over. And I don't understand what that difference is, and why my brain clicks that way.
I think about that all the time. It's like what we what we expect from things changes all the time. Like what you expect from a movie is different from what you expect from a movie, like from a TV show. And like I was saying, it's like when we were first starting, we were not expecting anything from YouTube. Like I was like, I'm not expecting people to really, like people didn't even know it was a sketch. Like people thought it was fake. So like, but now there's an entire like anybody I know who has like a 9-year-old or a 10-year-old, they're like their entire lives. Like one of the Atlanta writers is like 18. And he's like, I don't really watch TV. He's like, all of my heroes and everything is on YouTube. So I'm like, and that skipped me. So you kind of have to understand like how and why your audience is going to where they're going. And like Issa was saying, like is true. It's like when we made Atlanta, like I was like, we started making Twitters like years before, like for the stuff we were planning on tying in. So when people go to those Twitters, they're like, oh, like I'm in the world.
Different feeds for different characters. I don't know.
Oh no, like there's like True Hip Hop Facts, which is like a fake like hip hop.
That's
facts.
on the
Like,
that's
on the show.
Right.
But we started that like years ago, and there's now like years of stuff.
Oh, that's amazing.
But if a person goes there, they're like, oh, I'm in the world. It's like going to like Harry Potter land, or you're like, oh, now when I go to Atlanta, I feel like I'm there. I'm like in the world longer. Like, which is all
And the
anybody
Paperboy
really
song's
wants.
good too. Like that's like.
Oh, thanks. That's my brother. Yeah, he's good.
It's like if you could make the Twitter feed as good as a real Twitter feed and the music is good, then who's to say where the line is anymore?
That's the fun part. Like people not knowing really where it ends, so people want to stay there longer.
You're
Like,
basically trying to stop people from saying fake.
yeah,
Exactly. Bring me back.
or is that
Like, wait a
true?
minute, but I like that better than the real song.
Is that true?
And also, by the way, since all of you hit this thing where you all did something clearly, I'm assuming, that you were passionate about, that caught fire and then propelled you, and then now you've all become your personas, you've become, because of fame and recognition, there's a sense that you're playing a character in a way, in all the publicity that's done and the way people perceive you. That's a very interesting moment in a career that you've all kind of gone through in a similar time frame. You probably more so with Whiplash, but all of a sudden when you go from, I'm putting this out there on my own, I hope somebody likes it, to we all like it and we like it a lot and we're going to tell our friends, and now all of a sudden everybody's staring at you. What was that experience like for all of you? Because it's not something that a lot of people understand or go through, but it's a pretty common experience among people who've been through it. I'm wondering what that was like when all the good things started happening for the first time.
I mean, I think there's an initial rush, like, wow, people really like this. This is crazy. This is great. And then, oh shit, I have to live up to this.
And you get scared.
You get really scared, and then you feel like the kind of light is on you. And then, you know, when you get your first piece of criticism, or people start to hate your stuff en masse, like that's kind of a big deal. But for me, it's actually only helped me creatively because it makes me uncomfortable, and that's kind of where I thrive, and that's kind of where I live in the first place. And so, you know, I just use it.
So the way it affected you creatively is it helped generate
yeah, it's
more?
propelled other stories for me, and it's just like I don't have a choice but to live in this world, in this state currently, and so it's just like you have to use it and make do, but it's extremely uncomfortable. And I made the mistake of naming my character in the show, because my name, you know, and I did not do that on purpose. It just happened. It was like, oh, I'm writing this show, it's Untitled, and I'll just call the character myself. Like, that's just it, and I'll change it eventually. And I just never changed it, and so.
Do you find that people assume that it's exactly your life?
100%.
I had been through it with Swingers too, where it's like I thought I was making fictitious characters. I did change the name, but it's my neighborhood, the same neighborhood you filmed La La Land, and everybody's like, "Oh, you made a documentary." It was the opposite of what you went through. Not real, fake. Real. So, and then you start to and so people just assume you're that person.
Yeah, for sure. We had a big storyline where a character cheats. I don't know if I can say that, but spoiler, oops. But now, like my like a lot of the comments, like I put up a picture of my grandma, and people are like, "You fucking cheater," you know. And that's just
your
it.
grandma's
At the end of the
That's
day.
interesting.
Nice.
Do you find, like, whether it's comments or reviews or whatever, like, how much do you read? I guess I always like find myself asking people that question, because I feel like
There's reviews and there's
I feel
social
like
media.
The
Those are
best
two
thing
separate.
is to, like, you know, the ideal I aspire
social
to
media
is to not
sending you
read
reviews.
anything, but I
don't
can
believe
never,
that.
I never live up to that ideal that I set for myself.
Which is
Not
what?
of not reading anything,
Not
just
Depends
being
on
in
what
like.
you want to,
you
what
know?
you're doing. Like all of the internet
How much do you
is-
engage with? Yeah.
It's just I don't engage, but I do use it as data. Like it's just so you gotta know.
How
Like
do you do that without the one without the other?
I engage through the art. Like I mean through
No,
what?
but
like-
how do you aggregate data if you're not reading the stuff?
Oh,
and
you
not
like-
have it impact you psychologically.
I just feel I don't know. Like I feel like just me personally, growing up with the internet, like I just know what trolls are. I know what perspectives certain people are why they're doing it. Like you can, for some reason, I can be like this person is the type like, and I also do data. I'm just like, okay, this person said this. I check what everything else they did, and I'll be like, oh, you like this kind of stuff, so of course you would feel this way about this, and like. And next time I won't leave this demographic of people out, or I'm like, that's fine that you feel that way. You'll like it more at the end of the season, or like you kind of realize how people are. But also like, online has opened up such a like it's caused me to understand like fame doesn't mean security, or it doesn't mean rich. Like fame is going through a weird thing where like it's in a weird time. Like what people are and like.
Well, the characters in your show are going through that as well. With that, the fame in hip hop doesn't necessarily mean.
Especially when
a
you're
lot of
selling
money.
drugs too. It's like where does that line when you're doing a lot of rappers? Because like basically all the stuff that came up from becoming famous, I was like maybe I can make like a hip hop Curb Your Enthusiasm with all the awkward moments that happen when people like I know you and you're like are you gonna rob me? Or like, are you know everything about me, but I don't know anything about you. And like, that's, I think, the scariest part about it. But like, as far as like what people
About fame
say.
in general, you mean? That
About-
people know you and you don't know them.
Yeah, like in your art and people assuming what happens on like people definitely think Atlanta's like my life and it's not. But that's the fearful part where you're like, okay, like there's a separation, but also like we were talking like, mixing in the real world gives them like that's what the reason a lot of people watch it like they like it that it's part of their real world so you have to kind of like toe that line.
But you don't know how much you're actually, because I know like I remember Fife from Tribe Called Quest, like how does everybody know I'm diabetic? I was like, what's one of your lyrics? You know, you put it in your.
You're the funky diabetic.
You're the funky diabetic. And you're like, oh.
You're the funky diabetic.
And I think honestly, there's a little bit of that because everything, like a poker player, those are all tells. Everything you're doing, every subject matter you choose,
Yeah, and it
you're
does
revealing
get
a lot about
it does get strange. There is a moment where someone will call something back to you, and you're like, how do you know that? Like where my dad is a worse Twitter addict than me, and people will be like, "How was the garage sale?" And I was like, because my dad tweeted his address and invited everyone to a garage sale at his house. And so then I'm
He made
getting
a lot of money. At
and
the
then I'm
garage
getting
sale.
tweets of like, "Hey, we got your Isaac Asimov novels." Like, that's a whole
But these
other
are
level.
new issues that are only going to get more and more. As a parent, when you're dealing with social, you know they're telling you, well, teach your kids to not do this and watch out for that. And they're so much more sophisticated, all of this stuff, because they're just
Right, the kids teach you. I guess.
Sophisticated though. I mean, I don't. It just feels like it does feel like it's replacing something, and I feel like an old person saying this and being judgmental about the upcoming generation. But it just feels like there's an element that I don't know that's being missed out on. Like because that is their
face-to-face.
primary mode of communication at the
It
end of
is.
the day. But it just feels like in kind of what you were saying in terms of towing the line and figuring out what's real or not, I don't know that that's going to be as easily grasped unless it's put in a bubble of this is specifically art.
I think as a culture we just have to decide what's sacred to us. Like
We can't even.
we can't even
Decide.
Yeah, I know we can't even decide. That's what I'm saying though. Like, but we're learning. That's what's so weird about it. Is like it's having the patience to like understand that we're learning all of this together. Like it's not that like the internet and like the social media isn't that old, and the fact that like people are just like if there was a girl who was like really cool and hot in my high school, like that was the only place. Now, like when she's 18, she's like, yeah, like these basketball players know me, and I'm gonna go hang. Like the world is so big, and what the information you put out means so much more and can become valuable later. Like that's also weird. What is like something you do for fun, like now
Right.
in 10 years, like people are like mining that and using that and selling that. Like it's a value system. Like you have to decide. Like I think kids are better now at understanding like this is valuable to me, so I shouldn't put this up. Or like some of them are like, you know, fuck it. Like
I have a friend who's an elementary school teacher, and he was talking about how he was, you know, his kids, like, all the songs they like were all about it's just between us. Like that was always the hook, like no one else knows. It's our secret. And I'm like, that's a generational thing that like the most intimate thing we can have is something we didn't tweet together. Like it's something we didn't tell anyone or put online. And that's like the hook of like a lot of R&B songs, like no one else knows.
Yeah, it's on
crazy.
it's on
And
low
that's
key.
that becomes suddenly the most intimate thing.
The most
in world. Something
valuable
you
commodity,
didn't- Something you didn't, you know, Instagram.
We
So
did-
when-
No, I was just gonna say like I just did a concert and there were no phones allowed, and you just see it differently. Like people enjoy it differently because now they have to tell people that.
Theater's one of the last bastions
Right.
of that.
It is true,
And it's, you can tell when someone's fidgeting and dying to check their phone. You know what I mean? Like but you're also, especially in theater where it really is frowned upon, when someone shines a spotlight on their own face to check their text, I can see it 20
Of
rows
course.
down. You know, I can see the identity of the person checking their phone.
Well, and so much of your show is, I got in. They want to take selfies, they want to take pictures, and you've been pretty good about when the time is right, you'll stand there, take pictures, go out with the crowd.
Yeah,
I value that.
Absolutely. I mean, that is, you know, I work in the art form where you're in the room with the people who are performing, and there's such a, you know, that's something you can't replace. You know, I think, especially talking about online stuff, I think we curate our reality so much. We block that friend on Facebook who is talking about politics constantly or putting up videos that you're not ready to see at 9 a.m. And then, so you curate your reality, but in the theater, like you're all watching the same thing.
And how did going from obscurity to being just drilled down by the limelight, how did that affect things? I would assume with the crowd in the room, it probably is.
It's funny. It happened in stages. First of all, you know, YouTube weirdly is tied into Hamilton too because I performed at the White House, and that was like one of the first like arts events they held at the White House.
Years before the show.
2009. Yeah, I had just left In the Heights. It was 2009, and I performed the opening song. I'd only written the opening song.
That's crazy.
And so that went online, and then. This is where like good luck comes into it because it didn't look like a C-SPAN event. HBO filmed the night because they were filming their poets who had performed that night. So the footage of it looks like a movie. Like, and that's no one's fault except the fact that, you know, Stan Lathan produced the evening. Like they just really did it well and filmed the hell out of it. And so I had a like. It took me 6 years to write the show, but I had a bunch of social studies teachers who were ready. You know, they were like, I've been showing this one clip to my kids for 6 years. Like, there's a whole show coming. So I knew we'd be okay with educators. I knew we'd get school groups. It's the rest of it that was really overwhelming. And doing the show is what kept me sane. You know, it's you know, we're more like chefs when we're actors on stage. Sure. We've got to make it from scratch that night.
That's
the
right.
people who were there last week, they may have read the review, but like you've got to cook it from scratch for them that night. Yeah. And so
the night I went, that was a particularly good night, you said?
That was a really great crowd. You went the night Bernie Sanders was there.
Bernie Sanders was there. I was like, why can't we
and
get
it was
tickets?
At the peak of his campaign.
In walks Bernie Sanders with his crew. And the place went crazy.
Yeah, so
crazy.
it was a very exciting, and it felt like opening night again. I mean, it was.
Yeah. Was that it? So we just, and it was also the last night of Jonathan Groff also.
You were at Groff's last night. Yeah. Oh,
that was amazing. Oh, it was just, I was buzzing. Like I was so happy I could share it with my daughter too, and then of course listening to it over because now it's and also here's the other thing, it's never there with taking pictures of everything and all of the way everything's documented and curated and edited, the memory transfers to that piece. But when you have a meal cooked by a great chef or you go to a live performance, that only exists here and it takes on. in a way it becomes indelible.
Yeah.
And so I'm glad I can't look back at a copy of that. Whereas when you look at something that's filmed, you could always go back to that movie. There's advantages to that because you could bring people on that roller coaster
And then
ride.
that was the other big shift that happened once the cast album came out, because
Mm-hmm.
you know, we ran 6 months off Broadway and everyone just is experiencing the thing in real time and they don't know what they're coming in for.
yeah.
And then my show's sung through. When you get the cast album, you get the whole show. It's the entire plot of
And
the show.
everybody knew it.
And everyone knew
And
it.
we're cheering for songs that
we
made it.
had this. We shifted from I'm experiencing this to this is Rocky Horror. I know all the words.
right.
I'm going to sing along in the front row. So I watched that shift happen as well. But certainly knowing that in this audience, this is your only chance to maybe see it. That also kept it fresh for us, and it also inspired us to. You know, I always am painfully aware, like, this is someone's first show, this is someone's last show. I don't care how tired I am. Like, they made miracles happen to be in that audience, so you have to give them that show. And so that's also what keeps you grounded, because it's hard. It's hard to go 3 hours without a break.
And now going into the next thing, right? Because I watched the PBS documentary, which fortuitously followed you through the whole period you're talking about, and it's like, I know this is my high point, and now you're going into other media, and you're going into doing Moana and also Mary Poppins, and working on Star Wars and all, you know. So that's kind of like, for our era, that's like you're being welcomed into the big boys table, like the grown-ups table. Okay, well, let's
Okay, we'll let them Star Wars.
This is the stuff that makes money. This is the thing.
Shave it up.
So what's it like now facing the next chapter? And you kind of just went through it now with La La Land, which is, to me, astounding that you could come off of the success of the first, and then you get back in there, and the next at bat you could hit another one.
I was lucky just in the sense that I wrote La La Land before Whiplash, and I just, the best thing that happened to me was La La Land, everyone saying no to La La Land. It was like, you know, years of trying to get La La Land made in Hollywood, everyone saying, you know, not just no, but like, please go away. Like, we do not want to hear about this musical. We don't want to hear about original musicals. We don't want to do anything like this. And so kind of doing Whiplash out of necessity a little bit. Whiplash was a much smaller movie that I kind of was able to actually put the money together for. But the whole time I was making Whiplash, I was hoping that, you know, hopefully if this doesn't entirely suck, it will give me some kind of calling card to make La La Land. So that was the
strategy.
That was the, in a weird way, the saving grace. I didn't have to go through that, like, God damn it, what's next?
Blank
you know,
page.
Kind of.
Yeah.
Yeah, because it was just sitting there. It was like, oh, any mileage I have now, I'm going to spend it all on.
And I think it's kind of nice that you're able to shift gears into to not have the responsibility of writing something from scratch and from where's that inspiration going to come from. You're getting to hook into other people, collaborate with other people, and theater's obviously very collaborative as well.
Absolutely.
So what's this been like, this next chapter coming off of that crazy?
I think it's the same as before. You know, I think we all, I certainly, the way I think about what I do is you toe this line between the things that are in you that you're burning to make, the idea that won't leave you alone in the shower or when you're walking your dog, and the opportunities that come along that are so, I would do anything to be a part of this, and I'd kick myself if I didn't do it, if I said no to it. And we all struggle with that balance. I'm sure you've all had that version of, like, I could double down and write my thing, or like, I got an offer to work on with this superhero of mine who I looked up to growing up, and making sort of a million decisions like that. Robert Rodriguez was like my big hero when I was in high school. That was my dude. I read Rebel Without a Crew. You know, he maxed out his credit cards and gave blood to make money to make.
That's the book I gave to the director of Swingers when we started.
Yeah, and what he says about the thing after your calling card is, don't let anyone, like, how to avoid the sophomore slump is like, don't let anyone know what your sophomore project is. Like, I'll go make this piece of 4 rooms, I'll go make this Cinemax movie, and make so much, like, random stuff that no one can be like, oh, is this your next thing? Is this your next thing? And so, I mean, that's the advice I took after Heights.
But did you, I was going to say, like, but in terms of, like, other than right? Those like things that wound up becoming Hamilton. You must have had to kind of bury yourself for a while just to create Hamilton. Like, did you feel like the outside world going, what the hell? Like, you had a success within the Heights. What are you doing? Like, when's the next
Oh
thing?
yeah,
Like,
and it's funny because you
hard
also,
to answer that.
You also, and everyone goes through this, whether you're even in the arts or not. What are the things you do to support your family and sort of keep going while you're doubling down on whatever that passion project is?
Yeah.
I was on a TV show that made the record of the lowest rated debut in the history of NBC, but I took that job because they told me they were going to kill me off at the end of the first season, and it shot in Philly, not LA, so I could stay home. So I could just take the train. I was number 5 on the call sheet. It was a lot of great theater actors in it. It was like Felicia Rashad and Steve Pasquale and Mike Esper. And so it was great.
What was the show?
I was gonna say, I gotta
It was
watch
called
this now.
Do No Harm. It was
about the
notorious because it
Hippocratic
had one
Oath?
of the worst advertising. It was like a Jekyll and Hyde like doctor plot. And it was the guy who had his hands like this, and there was like a face on his hand.
That was not the best advertising.
Paul F. Tompkins used to call him Dr. Face Hands because the sign was up all over LA.
I was surprised we all saw the poster. I didn't know it.
Very sticky marketing. That's a good sign.
Dr. Face Hands. His legacy lives on. No one knows the show he's from. But that was my Hamilton residency. I was making a living. I was only working 2 days a week, and I was going to historical Philly where I would go do research on Hamilton. I wrote Satisfied from that. I wrote that in my trailer working on Do No Harm. So you balance those things out.
Do you guys feel like in between those when you're like, okay, what am I gonna do next or whatever? Like, do you guys ever feel the pressure because you do have a connection with your audience so much to just give them more of the same thing?
I feel like you hear them more, you see what they're saying more in a very new way. But if anything, I want to give them something different. You know, I just feel like I don't want to be placed in the box that you want. Like, because then you're just delivering, then you're just like supply demand. There's nothing fulfilling about that at the end of the day.
And your audience grows up. I watched that happen with my first show, Within the Heights. I had kids who discovered that show and that was their show, and they did the rush tickets every week. And then we ran for almost 3 years in the Heights, and I watched them fall in love with the next show. And I was like, oh, you're not the groupies of my show anymore. You're going to see that show now.
But now you also have, and I've experienced this a little bit somewhat with Iron Man, more with comic book fans, more so with Jungle Book, but now getting ready to do Lion King, and you with Mary Poppins, you with playing Lando. Now it's not just your own work that you're being judged against. That stuff, those stories, those movies belong to people, and they grew up with it.
Yeah.
And now you're going to be adding another experience to that thing that's part of them. And with social media too, it's like you said, you can figure out where everybody's coming from with it. Certainly with this, you're tapping into something. How does that feel for the two of you facing that? On the one hand, what's the positive, and also what are the things that...
I've already had a really interesting sort of cautionary tale experience in terms of playing with a classic. One of my first gigs after the success of Heights was writing Spanish language lyrics for a new revival of West Side Story. And it was with Arthur Lawrence and Sondheim were both behind it. I would never have touched that thing if it weren't the actually original creatives, surviving creatives behind it. And so, that was the pitch, and I had a blast writing it, and I kind of assumed the audience would go with it. It was like, well, everyone knows West Side Story, so if Maria breaks into Spanish for I Feel Pretty, like, we all know the lyrics to I Feel Pretty, like, they'll go with us. They did not go with us.
What happened to that?
There was a huge backlash from the audience being like, we want to see West Side Story. And it was surprising to me because my last show, In the Heights, has tons of Spanish in it. And we go back and forth between Spanish and English, but it's in the original DNA of how it was created and constructed, as opposed to this beloved 50-year-old show. And so, I sort of watched with dismay as the producers and the director kind of peeled back everything I wrote until it was just a revival of West Side Story.
You had a preview process, though, which is sort of...
Yeah, there was one where they tried to do super titles, and that really didn't work. It doesn't work, you're trained to see it in opera, but it doesn't really work in musical theater. And so, I kind of carry that with me of like, if you're working on something, I'm involved with the live action Little Mermaid. I don't know in what capacity yet. I just kind of have my hat on as the like #1 fan of that movie. I'm like, I feel like I'm just the head of the Don't Fuck It Up committee. You know, that's what I'm there to do. And if that requires
Quality
writing
control.
music or you know, saying this whole subplot doesn't fly in live action.
Well, sometimes just having a meter for, no, I love it, and this is what I'd want to see, which I think is kind of a unifying thing to all of your work, is like clearly you're making stuff you want to
I
you
feel like
want
that's
to
the
do.
only arbiter you can have, or
People-
barometer you can have.
People know when it's something that's been out already. People know what they want from it. I was asked to do a reading for like Princess Bride, and then like I was like, oh yeah, and I was
It's what, a film?
Oh no! We were just doing a live
stage reading. Yeah,
stage
right.
reading, and I was doing, and I'm just gonna the inconceivable guy, but I didn't say I didn't use the list, and people are like, "What the fuck are you doing?" Like people are like so upset. Like everybody, like people are like, I know people are like cheering for everybody who sounds like the person and that, and I'm like, let me try something different, and people are like, no, you're gonna fucking say inconceivable, like
You're
exactly
at that point,
like
you're in a
that.
tribute band.
Yeah,
You have to do it. You have to sing it like Freddie Mercury.
But yeah, it's not bad being a Queen tribute band because their songs are dope. You know, like you do it the way that makes sense to them. I feel like. It's
Well,
like,
how do you feel about Lando? I mean, how did that happen, and how do you tool up for that?
I really felt like the role, like it was the first action figure I ever had. So it was like I remember like my dad giving it to me. I had a Darth Vader one, and this one I kind of lost the cape and bit off.
And the lightsaber
The
came out of the arm.
came out of the arm, and I ripped
And it was
that out.
it was this long.
Yeah, it was like honey, and like I got rid of it, and I think my mom was like, good, because he's gonna poke his eye out or something. So I remember Lando really well, and I don't know. It was always part of growing up, just seeing him, because like, you know, he's like the only black guy in space. So it was like I was like, wow, like this is cool, and he was like the cool one. Looking at it now, as far as the movie's concerned, like I just realized, you know, you wanna. He still has to be cool, you know, like the way of, and cool is an interesting thing. It changes so much, like due to like I was actually we were talking about Black Mirror, like I was watching Black Mirror, and there's a episode where they like go through time, and like in the 50s there's a nerd, and in the 60s he's a nerd, but by the time he gets to 2000, it's like, oh, he's just a hipster. Like he's not a nerd anymore. Like, and actually the cool guy from this time is like cool changes depending on the perspective. So I was like, this just needs to speak to like the characters, and also like it's fun because like it's beforehand, so he's still figuring it out a little bit, which I think is fun. Like,
And great filmmakers, great cast.
yeah, I'm so excited about those.
And
guys.
they were good because they did 21 Jump Street, right? So they did that same twist on cool now isn't what cool was,
right.
which I wasn't expecting. And I was like, wow, and I felt like it was opening me up to a new world, which I think is what I really appreciate about all of your work. It's like it feels oddly relatable and personal, even though it could not be more different from the experience I had coming up, whether it's the world you created, the world you reflect. And honestly, even with yours, like it set really a story like 20 years after I had explored similar subject matter with swingers in the same area, and then to see what this generation, how they're living through the dream, and with a sense of nostalgia for what Hollywood is and breaking in and kind of those first baby steps.
Yeah. I mean, I remember Swingers being like, it's obviously like, it's like, when you're looking at like the pantheon of LA movies, which I wanted to do, before I was going to shoot here, try to figure out the different ways you can show the city. It's weirdly like, obviously it's a city where more movies have been shot here than any other city in the world, but it's also a city that, given that statistic, is very seldom actually seen in movies, and so there's those few like Swingers.
Well, usually it's
or
shot
like,
in Toronto or
Atlanta. That's the new.
I've never seen Atlanta shot for Atlanta too.
Oh, yeah.
By the way.
Right, that's the new.
That's
Yeah.
good on you for that.
Yeah, like it was cheap.
But to actually call it, to make it about it, you'd be surprised how little you know about it, having seen it filmed somewhere.
Well, you'd be surprised that we had to have like conversations about, having to convince people that we actually wanted to shoot in LA.
Yeah.
Oh my God,
for a
it happened
movie
to me
called-
with my
called
specific
Lava.
show. My
Yeah,
show
that's
is
really-
so set
and
in
your
a
show's it's
very
very
specific
authentic,
part
too.
of
So
LA
where they
I
try
grew
to
up.
Yeah, look
convince
at
you to
They
shoot.
tried to shoot in the valley. They tried to shoot like it's South LA and
Yeah.
there's South Central. There's just specific parts. There's Lamar Park. There's Inglewood. Like all places I know. And I grew up in an area called Windsor Hills, Baldwin Hills, and they call it the Black Beverly Hills. And it's very specific to people I knew, and people just didn't understand that I wanted to be there. It was like, well, there are big houses over here. There's big houses. Like we don't need to. And it was like, no, like there's still an essence there that I want, and I want to see like if even if there's an extra, like I want
That's
them
right.
to feel like they're part of the community. I want to feel like the neighborhood is there, and there's something just about being present and acknowledging that neighborhood that I feel like is just.
I think
it
people
changes
demand
things.
authenticity now because they get it so much.
They want it to be
from-
true. You want to feel
Yeah.
like you're just. You want that comment that says true. You
Right.
want that
Yeah.
at the end of the day.
Yeah,
and
the
'cause
bullshit
there's just
meter
something
is
real.
It's
very
really
attuned
high.
right now.
But everybody can feel the moment too. Like it's like that. Everybody's looking for moments, and it's like if you're like even in Atlanta, I'm like if we don't shoot this, we're gonna miss the dude who's like heroined out holding an orange.
Right.
And that is important because it's something I couldn't think of, but I always know is there.
Right.
Like or something that's a feeling that like you can't just make up. Like that's the other thing too. Like everything's possible to make up now.
Yeah.
But stuff that feels real, where you're like, I can't make that up. Like, you can't pay for that anymore. Like, you can't find that. It just feels better.
Listen, thank you all for coming here. This is such a great group of people to talk to. I'm so glad to be able to share these stories with everybody out there especially the people who are struggling and kind of where you all were a couple years ago. It's fascinating, and keep up all the good work. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Hi.
Hi.
What's going on? I'm Alicia Keys. I'm Taraji P. Henson.
Jon Favreau.
Jeff Bridges here.
Matt Damon.
Naomi Harris.
Thanks for watching.
Thank you so much for watching.
Thanks for watching.
For more videos, be sure to subscribe.
I guess subscribe online for more videos if you want more of that stuff.
I don't work for The Hollywood Reporter. They paid me to say that, though.